Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
This is Maddie Dalrymple, the author of the Ann Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts, and you're listening to Mysterious Goings On.
The central human emotion of a craving for adventure is often at cross purposes with the lack of humility that the modern humanity seems to have these days, or I guess the humility that we lack to a large degree. And that's why I'm very excited and interested to talk to our guest today, because he has written wonderful adventure stories, but they also hold with them a respect for nature, the planet, as well as a clear understanding of where humanity may actually be as we find ourselves today with our technology. And this is me editorializing, leaping in leaps and bounds ahead of where we are emotionally as a species. So we're going to find out Charlie agrees with that or not in a minute. We welcome Charlie Sheldon here to Mysterious Goings On. Charlie went to Yale and UMass, where he received a master's degree in wildlife biology, resource management. He's worked in the fishing industry for 15 years as a deckhand, mate, skipper, and consultant, then relocated to the Pacific Northwest in 1990 to be near Olympic National Park. In other words, he's lived the life I always dreamt I should have. He worked at seaports for nearly 30 years as a planner, project manager, and executive. When he retired from seaports in 2012, he returned to sea as a merchant sailor for 4 years, working on various container and military vessels as able-bodied seaman and bosun. He retired in 2016 to work full-time in his writing, and nowadays he hikes in the Olympic National Park whenever he can, cooks for his wife, pesters his grandchildren, and continues to scribble tales, and finds a little bit of time to speak to you here on Mysterious Goings On. Charlie Sheldon, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Did I get it somewhat right in my intro? I've read a lot of your stuff on humility. It seems to me you and I might agree on that to a degree, that maybe man is at a place, we're at an inflection point where the reach of our technological ability has exceeded the grasp of our maturity as a species. Is that something that's kind of close to what you're saying?
Partly. I mean, I think that's correct. I'm saying something a little different, I think, and maybe it is the same thing, but I think what I'm saying is that I think because of our technological accomplishments, which are unbelievable, we've lost the ability to understand that we don't know everything. We think we know everything. We think we can, actually, we have the arrogance to think that somehow we can re-engineer the climate so we can modify the impacts that we're supposedly having on the climate. That's a pretty arrogant assumption. and my thesis, which emerged from writing these, I didn't start with this. I mean, this is almost on reflection after I finished all my tales, which is that if you believe in evolution, and actually many people don't, but if you believe in evolution, then we humans, the people we are, have evolved. Most of our time of evolution was before farming, was in the period when we were hunter-gatherers. We were small groups. We were not the apex predator. The big animals were the apex predators. We lived in a time of great ice and huge climate shifts with ice changes. And we had, by necessity, we knew we didn't know everything, and we needed to somehow find a way to survive in the face of awesome forces. And I think we've lost that to some degree because of our technological abilities. And yet we're still the same beings we were back in the Ice Age. And so, to some degree, I think nowadays we push this idea that we can do everything, but we actually might benefit from admitting we don't know everything. Maybe we ought to listen to the other side a little bit more, or just so maybe we ought to just cool it and slow down a little bit. It seems to me today people are so busy shouting at each other about their various points of view, and And I actually, when I started writing this series, I wanted to write a chapter on each of the deadly sins, which was way beyond my capability. But then I realized as I thought about all this that there is, I believe, an eighth deadly sin, or maybe it's the first deadly sin, and that's the sin of zealotry, of people who are convinced they're right and they need to tell everybody else how to think and how to live. And to me, that's the way, the road from that leads straight to hell, in my opinion. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I mean, we're very similar in thinking of this.
I don't think we're perfectly aligned, but I think you can see where I tried to look what I tried to do here, Charlie. I tried to put how I think onto you. I tried to do confirmation bias on you and say, okay, Charlie's totally agreeing with me here. But what I love is that we're both here across the miles looking at each other through a screen, and we're both realizing, hey, wow, we kind of, here's the things we do agree upon. And what you're saying, I think, is that not enough people are doing that. You wrote on your blog, and this is on charliesheldon2.com. The 2 is a numeral. I'll put a link in the show notes. There's this great piece called Screamers on Fish Boats. And dude, I'm going to tell you, is it okay if I read a little bit of it? Is that all right with you? Or,
Sure.
And this is the end of it, but folks, trust me, it's not a long thing. It's not too long, didn't read kind of thing. It's worth your time. But this is the thesis here. Charlie says, it seems to me that the reason it feels like we have screamers everywhere, and he explains what screamers are on a fishing boat, and you go read it for yourself so you can hear all this detail. But anyway, as I said, it seems to me that the reason it feels like we have screamers everywhere in politics, in the media, on school playgrounds, must have something to do with forgetting that we cannot have a community unless people listen and speak carefully, meaning are humble with themselves and others. At sea, in the microcosm world that was limited to the boat, a screamer was toxic, dangerous, and inflected the entire world. In ancient times, such a person was driven from the tribe, shunned, left to wander alone. Maybe we could use a little more of that now, because with all the screaming going on, people lose sight of what they don't know, what they need to learn, and what they should be doing to keep the community strong. Couldn't agree more. I think there is all this, Sturm und Drang and all these, the sound and fury signifying that there's all of these things that take away from the basic humanity. It's not that we need to get into this, but just turn on your TV and the mask debate and the vaccine debate and all these things where it's, everybody's about their feelings and not about what's right for the community as a whole, in my opinion. So, and Charlie, I know you did not want to come on the show and talk all about this stuff, but I just had to start off with this because it really did move me, and it makes me want to, of course, read your books.
Well, thanks.
So let's talk about these books, shall we? Let's hear your rundown on what you've been writing, and then I got a few questions here and there.
Okay, so I've wanted to write all my life and have written all my life, and I've written a number of novels, some published, some self-published. When I came to the Northwest in 1990, where I'd always wanted to come, I was working for a port out here, the Port of Seattle, and I became very involved with having to deal with conflicts between tribal fishermen and ships coming into the harbor. And I did that for 15 years. It was the most interesting work of all the work I've ever done dealing with this issue. It was fascinating. And along the way, hopefully I learned a little bit about tribal history and what the first people who lived here, who were very much present today in the Northwest, unlike New England, where I'm from, where it was 300 years ago. And I learned very soon that there's a legend in most Native American or First People cultures that says they've always been here. They didn't come over on the land bridge. They've always been here. In fact, if you tell them they came over in the land bridge, this makes them really the most recent group of humans on the earth. And that's seen as an insult, and maybe rightfully so. So they think they've always been here. So I noodled with this. I thought, could this be true? How could it be true? And that was one issue. And then I did a lot of hiking in the Olympic National Park, which is partly why we moved out here. I mean, I wanted to do this, and it's just a treasure. And it's one of the last unknown wilderness in the continental US was in the Olympic National Park. That was more than 120 years ago. So I wanted to write a story about the Olympics, hiking in the Olympics and and being in the Gulf of Lancaster. I wanted to write something with a sea story in it because I've spent a lot of time at sea. And I wanted to play with this legend and seeing how I could integrate that into a story. And finally, the last thing was that you need a vehicle to tell a story. And the vehicle I wanted to work with was something about a coming of age with a troubled teen trying to find their power. And I ended up finding a character came to me, and it wasn't a young boy, which you'd think might be the case to go into the wilderness. You know, I'm revealing my sexist background maybe, but so what I ended up with was an ordinary young girl, Sarah Cooley, and she finds her power and strength in an impossible way, and that started this story. And originally it was just going to be a story, one book, but it turned into a series, and we can talk about how that happened. But that's basically what it is and there's magic realism in these stories. In other words, I love the magic realism genre, if you can call it that, where there's a normal world, but there's one or two things that really are not possible. And if you write it the correct way, most readers will go with it. They'll just accept it. Some readers don't, but many do. And I think back to your earlier point about humility, there's a lot of ways to get a horse to drink water, right? And one thing with magic realism and writing, just like with science fiction and writing, is it enables you to get the reader to imagine things that are outside the current dogma of thought and approach. And only then can you maybe get them to see things a little bit differently. Not that I was trying to get people to see things differently. I was just telling a story, you know, and ultimately it's just a story, right? And but if you fall into the story, maybe at the end of it, if I'm really successful, you'll be thinking, well, could that be true? How could that be true? Could he be right? That's what you want. You want people to be in the story and then to be provoked enough when the story's over to be thinking about it still. That's all you can ask for as a writer.
It's absolutely right. So I have a 13, well, in a month, by the time this airs, by the way, 13-year-old daughter. And boy, you are a better writer than me. I cannot imagine trying to get into her head to write this kind of story. Was that difficult for you?
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, there's a whole thesis these days in writing about, you know, if you're not a woman, you can't write about women. If you're not a man, you can't write, you know, and if you're of this culture, you can't write about that culture. And that's, I think, defies the whole purpose of imagination and writing.
Agreed.
But what I did was I've had some experience with, including some of my own experience when I was very young, but I've had experience with kids who've really struggled, you know, and I learned with watching this with friends of my kids and stuff, that there's a particular class of kid who has trouble that I think is an order of magnitude more challenging than anything else. And that's the young teenage girl who just ends up having to run away, just can't fit in, you know, just can't fit in. And I think that, you know, and I knew of a few of those folks where we raised our kids. And to me, the courage and difficulty of what they dealt with was always just stunning to me. And as I wrote this story, I wanted to have a character who was really strong. And to me, the strongest people are, you know, those if you know, I knew parents whose 13-year-old daughter, your daughter at age, you know, ran away and lived in the streets for months in another city. And I can't imagine what the parents went through, let alone what this kid went through to survive, you know. And you can judge it and you can say whatever you want. But the truth is that form of survival takes a certain kind of grit and steel that I think, you know, many people don't have. So that's what happened. And as far as the characters and so on, they came to me. Whatever's wasn't like I sat down and thought about how should Sarah be. It was more I did about 3 years of research to start this series. And when I actually started the series, it was in a writing class. I thought I ought to take a writing class if I'm serious about this stuff. And in the writing class, an evening writing class I took at the University of Washington, the first exercise we did was a write for 3 minutes. And that I started writing, and that was the first few paragraphs of what's now the book Strongheart, the first book in the series. And so that's how it started. And I just wrote what I saw.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more complicated than that, because it took me 4 months to write the first draft and then 3 years to get the story right. You know,
Wow.
it's not, so it took me 11 years to write the series, and it just, there's a certain amount of seasoning, and anyway, it's so that's what happened. And so long as, and I've had my stories have strong women in them,
Yes.
because my wife pointed out to me some of my earlier books didn't have strong women in them. What the hell's wrong with you? So I think, well, you're right. So I'll try. But these stories are liked, especially liked, I think, by women, because the women characters, with one exception, are really strong, and they're women doing things that you don't really expect. For example, in my third book, Totem, one of the women characters, Louise, she's the daughter of a guy who had a salvage tug company, and so she's basically a tug operator, right? And you don't usually think about that, right? So that's I was trying to do something which was showed, okay, what happens if you have a bunch of strong women thrown into situations which traditionally you deal with men? But again, it's all back to the story. You know, you want a good story.
Regular listeners will be, oh, here he goes with that question again. But I'm going to ask, when male writers, it's a very big trend these days for male writers to have female heroines. And this is crossing all genres that I interview with. And I'm talking mystery thriller genre, I'm talking suspense, I'm talking literary and adventure, sea adventure now. So you've already kind of answered the question. It's not like you said, I'm going to make it a female heroine. It just became the point where you thought, no, this is more natural as to what I wanted to do. But have you kind of, do you see the point of that question? Are you seeing that yourself, or what are your thoughts on that? Because I do appreciate what you said about how a man, saying a man can't write about a woman, et cetera. I find all of that stuff ridiculousness, but overcorrection might be the word I would use. But anyway, what are your thoughts though on that in general? Was it a conscious decision? I can tell already it wasn't like a marketing decision, right?
No, it had nothing to do with marketing. It was just to tell the right story. I'd say honestly, and this is based on my limited, the whole other part of this is book promotion and trying to understand that, which I loathe. I can't tell you how I loathe it. And it's very hard to be noticed, but it does seem to me today, as opposed to 50 years ago, that the publishing business seems to be more controlled by women these days than by men. Most of the writers you see in many series are women and not men, it seems.
Yeah.
And I've gone to, I've gone to a number of, I've gone to library conferences where librarians tend to mostly be women, not men. You go to book publisher companies and, men are involved, but there are a lot of women. So I think one issue is just that women may be the biggest group of readers for some of these books. I mean, it could be, and so that's what I'd say.
And I appreciate that. And I totally agree with you, because really all we can do as individuals is be anecdotal about this, but I've observed the same thing. And it's funny, I have two podcasts. I have this show and I have another show called PR After Hours for my day job, public relations, marketing, that kind of.
Right.
That's overwhelmingly men, the business one. This show, the guests are overwhelmingly women. And the readership or the listenership is the same. So I totally I can confirm that just based on my own anecdotal evidence too. But I always like to ask male writers who do that. And I'll say, but I say this too, and the readers are groaning or listeners are groaning. I'm still working on finding that feminine voice in my fiction. But my series that I've written is going to be book 8. It's going to be out at the same time as your book, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Your next book. And it's the last, oh gosh, I just said it. It's probably the last of that series. And I'm going to move on to something else. And I have a female heroine in mind, simply because I think it's better for the story, like you just said. So there's always a reason I ask that question. It's not me just trying to be an overt sexist asking a prehistoric man kind of question. I'm just curious about your take on it. So, well, let me just say this though. I'm curious about this. Your books are very well reviewed. Kirk has said that Strong Heart was rife with secrets and hidden depths, said that Adrift is a stirring, rich tale of spirituality, grit, and danger. And you have not just a fair amount, but a very good amount of reader reviews. Besides the fact that you write damn good books, obviously, what's your secret to getting all these reviews?
Well, that's, oh man. Well, I think, these days I'd say, and this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody, with so many books, I think there's 70,000 books a year produced. And now the Amazon total number of novels is like 17 million. It's something unbelievable. So now the
Crazy.
question is, how do you get noticed? How do you get seen? And I'd say that most of I'm kind of a dinosaur when it comes to social media.
Yeah.
I do the best I can, but I'm an old white guy who's going to listen to me, really. I have a few little niches. People like sea stories, enjoy my books. But I think the secret to me in terms of getting all these reviews, was that I stumbled on this group called the Online Book Club, run by this guy, Scott Hughes in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He had 150,000 members. And now he has over 3 million members, right? And I invested some money with him. I signed up for early on for Book of the Month, where my book was featured on his website for a month. And part of the deal there is, you give a PDF file of your book to him, and he gets it out to you. He has lots of people who are readers. In fact, I think a large group of his members are looking for free books, and that's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've had Strongheart's been out the longest. I have almost 500 reviews on Strongheart, at least on Amazon, and I have about 150 of Adrift, and Totem's just starting. I got the first review for them, and I'm going to be getting many of those coming. And so so I have this, it's a little bit weird. I have a fairly large international readership, who through this online book club, right, who are following this series. And then, of course, I try to focus on the Pacific Northwest and people who like to read about the Pacific Northwest, because these are tales set in the Pacific Northwest. I'm retired now, but you need to keep a day job. It's not like I'm selling a lot of books traditional way, right?
Right.
It's a struggle getting your books in bookstores,
Right.
but I'm getting some pretty good readership, and I'm getting great reaction to people. So that's all you can ask for.
No, I just to dip my toe in on. That's funny you said that online book club recently, and the reviewers are not playing around there. By the way, I've noticed that. I had a review done, and it made me took a hard look in the mirror about one of my oldest books, and it was good. I'm glad I did it, because even though it's been around for almost 13 years, there was some couple of things that needed fixing, and I'm glad I could go back and fix them. But I like that group, and I think you're wise to do it. I think I will look into the book of the month as well down the road. Kirkus, though, have you found? I still think, I don't care how you arrive at getting Kirkus to review your book, I think that it still carries some weight. What do you think?
Well, let me first of all say that these books are not self-published. I mean, I have a publisher,
Right.
Iron Twine Press. I mean, he's a very small publisher, and you could argue it's effectively like being self-published, but he and I work together, and
Sure.
he's been a great support to me. And the benefit of having a publisher, among others, is with a publisher, you can get into bookstores with a return policy if the books don't sell, which is huge. And you can't do that if it's self-published. All right. So I've done that. And so each time I've done a book, he's gotten the Kirkus review, and I got one for Strongheart. I got one for Adrift. And now I just got the Kirkus review for Totem. And I mean, you couldn't sit down and hire someone to write a better review for a book than what these people did. It was unbelievable. And so that's been great. And what happens in those reviews are third-party reviews, publisher reviews, and that's what the bookstore trade looks to. They don't, they need that, as far as I know. Again, I don't know anything about this. I'm just guessing in some of these things, but it does seem that having a Kirkus review gets your toe in the door with at least a bookstore buyer considering your book. Now, I mean, we could go on for a long time. I mean, I literally drove around the Northwest 8,000 miles. I went to every one of 150 bookstores with Strongheart, trying to get them to carry Strongheart. And it wasn't very cost effective, because the book buyer might not be there. They don't know who I am. You're coming off the street. I left a few on consignment. It's kind of a mystery how this all works. I'm just hoping by being persistent, it'll help.
I love this. So you have this, and I know we can't go into it, but you've had this odyssey of visiting all these indie
Oh, yeah.
bookstores, which is,
Oh, yeah.
that alone has got to be a great story, you know?
Well, it's been pretty interesting, and what I learned by going through that, which is hard as it is to be a writer. I mean, those people, man,
Oh yeah.
that's got to be a labor of love. I mean, they're all doing little coffee shops now and other ways to make a little extra money, and I don't know how any of them survived this pandemic. And they're all very individual, and of course, you realize pretty quickly that really, if you want to sell a book in a bookstore and you're not a well-known author, there's a very limited area
Yeah.
where you need to get on the table where they can see the cover of your book. And there's only a limited amount of space that they'll
Right.
devote to that. And if you can't get your cover to be cover visible as opposed to spine out, good luck.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, right? And I don't
Yeah.
like, anyway. So, all you can do, at least in my opinion, I do the best I can.
Yeah.
This time with Totem, I set a launch date well in advance of when the book was finished. I've got it in the pipeline for many, many reviews. I mean, I'm doing it a little bit better. But again, it's just a matter of people noticing.
Yeah,
the book
absolutely.
thing. It's why I've been doing podcasts, quite honestly, because there may be some people in your audience who might otherwise never stumble to this, who might say, "Oh, I'll take a look," and that's all I'm asking. Take a look.
It's an investment of just a little bit of your time to talk about,
Right.
you and your books, which I think that's why people should go on podcasts. But it's funny. I did my book was in a number of indie stores, or a couple of my books were, and then finally I got to one where a guy said, "I'm pulling you because I see you're on Amazon too," and I'm just like, dude, I can't make a living just on your independent bookstore. And I hate to do that because I love indie bookstores and I support them as best I can. I've done a lot of book signings, but there's just this it's not all indies do that. But the last indie bookstore I was in a few years ago just said, well, we have a policy now. If you're on Amazon too, we're not going to shelve you. And I thought, well, okay, I don't know how to feel about that other than, I might have sold a couple of books a year through them and I sell way more through Amazon. I hate that. I hate to have to capitulate to that, but it seems to be where the market is.
Well, I think that's a dilemma.
Yeah.
For example, my webpage, where you can read about all the books and read the background information you've been reading. If you click on the webpage, the landing page, if that's the right phrase, right away, what comes up are links to all 3 books through the indie bookstore referral system, right? That's
first
the
thing
first
I noticed.
you see. And then from there, you go to each of the books, right? You can read about the books, and so you can go as deep as you want or not, okay? Now, earlier version of that web page had, instead of just the picture of the cover, had a picture of the cover, which was the Amazon link, so you could read inside or buy it. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's good maybe for people who are buying the book, but as you say, bookstores are going to think, wait a minute, do I want to do this? So because I'm trying to move my books now through bookstores, I reformatted the link. Here's the way I think about it. Everybody knows about Amazon. If they're going to buy from Amazon, they'll just click on Amazon, look up the book.
So
right?
true.
So I'm just putting on, I want people to go through indie bookstores. So that's what I'm putting on the webpage. There's nothing on Amazon on my page. It's all it's about indie bookstores. But the book is on Amazon. I mean, you can't not have it. I mean, for the ebook, you have to. So it's a bit of a dilemma. And honestly, I think that it's a moving target. I think bookstores are trying to adjust as this goes on because, some of them early on wouldn't have anything to do with Amazon, but then now 5 years later, they have to because of, it's a dilemma.
It is. Yeah. And by the way, I don't hold any grudge about that. I told him, I said, I get it. You're in a survival situation here. And I always would point them there. But anyway, I appreciate you indulging me in a lot of this kind of behind the scenes talk about writing and marketing. I know it's not everybody's fun topic, but a lot of the listeners who are writers, I get these questions all the time because they see somebody like Charlie Sheldon who has a lot of good reviews and they want to know, how did he do it? So, and I always say the first answer is, as I said earlier, he writes damn good books. But as we start to transition here, unfortunately, and our trail might be coming to an end soon, I've got to ask you though, when you go out in an Olympic, do you go by yourself? on your
Uh,
hikes?
Usually.
Really?
Um, there's two answers to there's several answers to that question. No, I don't always go alone. I mean, I've gone with other people. I had a few people I went with every year for at least one 10-day trip a year, and there'd be 2 or 3 of us. But I tend to go alone. I've always done this alone, and I'll go off, and I've even gone off trail alone. I have a beacon with me, so
Okay.
if I get in trouble, I have a beacon with me. I know that people would tut at me and shake their fingers and say, "What are you doing?" But that's what I do. I don't go. I don't. At my current age, 74, I don't do the same stuff I did at 50. Right.
Right.
I'm pretty careful. I'm noticing now that going downhill is a little harder than it used to be for me. But I even went out. Yes, I went out last year at the end of September alone for 5 days looking for the unnamed lake.
Unnamed lake. I saw the video.
Yeah. So, and it was a tough trip, and I'm trying to get ready to do a tough trip today. And I'm walking around with this loaded pack. And I was just saying to my wife, Jesus, I don't know. It gets harder every year, but it's nice out there. So that's what I do.
Don't get me wrong. I'm going this weekend on a kayaking trip in deep into the Mark Twain National Forest here in Missouri. Okay. And I mean, I've been out on 26-mile kayaks with buddies, and you didn't see any other humans for at least 10 of those miles. So I get that, but I was not alone. The last time I went alone, I used to go bouldering, smart kayak, right? My 20s by myself. And then I nearly got bit by a rattlesnake once. And I thought, I don't think I should. This was back before cell phones and GPS and all that crap. Right. So I stopped. But when I saw the video of you talking about the unnamed lake, okay, and you're talking, that's a little sketchy. I don't know if I want to go try to do that. I just thought, gosh, is he alone? And I'm not saying it because of your years, okay, Charlie. I'm not saying that at all. Yeah. I'm saying it because just right. I mean, people go missing, and one wrong move and you fall the wrong way. It could be really bad. So you've got this beacon, which is great. And you've got obviously the smarts and the survival skills if something goes a little pear-shaped, I guess. But I guess the question is, you don't have any fear about it, do you?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you describe that. I mean, I'm not afraid of animals or that sort of thing. I mean, you have enough fear to be cautious.
Well, no, I don't mean like you're being crazy stupid because you have, I have no fear. I'll walk up to that grizzly and pat it on the head. But I just mean, you're not like a lot of people. Just the whole idea of going alone into the wilderness for any length of time would be filled with trepidation.
Well, I remember once I was on a hike a few years ago, and I started falling into the mindset of thinking there was something following me. And when you start thinking that way, it gets really uncomfortable. Your back starts prickling and you start turning around, and then it's kind of a do loop you get caught in, right?
Right.
And so I don't want to go there, but I think here's another comment, and this is my grandfather, who was very old when my father was born. And so he was doing this stuff in the first decade of the 20th century, 1906, 1907. He did a lot of backcountry hiking and hunting alone, and he always went alone, and he did some gnarly trips. So we had a tradition sort of in my family that this is what you did. But the other comment I'd make is, yeah, it's dangerous to do anything alone. I understand that, but we become such a protected, helicopter kind of society. And I'm sorry, I think back to the point about human beings. I mean, until very recently, I'm sorry to say this, but life was cheap. Stuff happened that was bad, and it was tough. Yeah. And it's still tough. It's just people like to think it isn't, and so, people can tut to me about, you shouldn't go alone. And I understand that. I don't want to be out there and have to rely on a helicopter to come to get me. That'd be the embarrassing part of it. But I try to be, and I don't take the risks today that I might have taken 40 years ago, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say this, but nobody knows about this, but there's a group of people out here in the Olympics who go alone all the time, and they don't use trails. They just head off cross country to the worst, gnarliest stuff you can imagine. Wow. And there's probably a dozen of them, and nobody knows about these guys, but those are the guys who are risk takers.
So, well, and boy, I hope I didn't make you think that I thought you were reckless by any means.
I've been reckless.
Oh, well, I think what I was trying to do, and hopefully I guess I didn't express it too well, was how much respect I have for you for doing it. Because I do agree. I'm in I'm 53, and it really clicked in me a few years ago. There's nothing guaranteed. And yeah, we kind of have this illusion, a lot of us modern people, that, oh, we shouldn't have any kind of risk in our lives, and that it's an anomaly for something bad to happen to people. It sounds terrible to say it, but I kind of realized, no, bad stuff happens a lot to people, even people who don't ask for it, so to speak. And when I started the past 5-6 years going into nature, that became very apparent to me. Even actually, just when I would observe how just creatures in the river interacting, eating each other, and all that, it's like, I'm not expressing well, but it's a real eye opener.
Well, if you go back to the thesis in this whole series of books, that stories made us human. It was the telling of stories that made us modern human beings, that ancient legends might be true, that there's value in what the ancient people did that we could perhaps use today. What we forget is their life was, when one level it wasn't so hard, another level it was brutal. Yeah. You had glaciers, you had huge animals, you had diseases, you had volcanoes, you had fire. And I think what happened for hundreds of thousands of years, where there were not very many humans, and oftentimes these small groups would be wiped out by these animals. They had to live in protected places, maybe along the shore and islands, because they couldn't live on the mainland because short-faced bears and the other animals would get them. And I think this went on for tens of thousands of years, until finally, either through climate, the big animals died, or groups of people gathered together and were able to, make them all extinct. And so our human nature today is based, we're human beings, right? So we're courageous and we're loyal and we're empathetic, but we're also vengeful and acquisitive and corrupt, and our nature hasn't changed from all those years ago. But we have, but now we're built a society where we're trying to pretend like we can live forever, and everybody can be protected forever, and you've got all these things to keep people safe. Well, I'm sorry, but at some point, it's up to you. So anyway, I was trying in some way to say in all these stories that maybe there were some things in the ancient times that helped us survive, rather than just to move us along to today. And we might be better off today looking at some of that stuff in some ways.
Charlie Sheldon, what a blessing to have you on this show, because I know I threw a lot of stuff at you from a lot of angles, and you just hit them right down the middle every time. I appreciate that so much. So as of today, this is October 28th as of the show airing. It's Totem airs officially. The big drop is tomorrow, correct?
That's correct.
Tell me, okay, and I don't know if we were clear, and I want to make sure I didn't shortchange you. Strong Heart is the first book, Adrift is the second, and then Totem drops tomorrow. Now, we've already discussed independent bookstores. Would you recommend, though, and what would you like us to do here if you want to get all, and folks, you can't buy this third book and not buy the first two. You might as well get all three of them. So, Charlie, you want to send them to your website and have them buy them through an independent bookstore? Is that the ideal direction you'd like to go?
That would probably be the ideal direction. They're standalone books. You don't need, but it's preferable to read them in order. But it doesn't matter. Kirkus even said about Totem, it's a standalone book, and it's the third book. And it's, by the way, twice as long as the other two. It's twice the book. But I would say I encourage people to order through their bookstore, buy through their bookstore. Now, obviously, if they're ebook readers, they're going to order it through Kindle or some ebook thing. Of course, I understand that. Sure. But for people who like to read printed books, order them through the bookstore. You can go to my webpage, or just go down to your local bookstore, and they can look the book up and they'll order it for you, and it'll be there in a couple of days.
Charlie, that's something I need to start saying more about mine is, what, if you're an ebook reader, go to Amazon, please do. But if you want the actual book, in a paperback or hardback form, go to your local bookstore and order it, because that way they can make a little money on it and they can order it, and everybody's a little bit better. I love that idea. But if you are looking for that, it's real simple, folks. You're just going to go to Charlie Sheldon #2. So it's charliesheldon2.com. There will be a link in the show notes, of course. Now, when you go there, this is a great site. It's really easy to navigate. You're going to have reviews. You're going to have his stuff on humilities, Olympic Peninsula tales, sea stories, real or folk tale, all this great stuff from Charlie Sheldon. And it's a treat. I'm telling you, it's as much fun, almost as much fun as having him right here in our mysterious goings on grotto, or whatever we call this thing. Charlie, thank you so very much for joining us. And man, best of luck with tomorrow's book launch.
Well, thanks a lot. And the only other little comment I made is Charlie Sheldon, IE, CHARLIE, SHELDON.
Oh, right.
Some people say EY and the #2. Yeah, it would be great. And most people who read these books like them, and that's all you can ask for. I mean, the greatest praise an author can receive is, I fell into your book and I couldn't put it down. And that's the highest praise you can ask for. I've been lucky enough to hear it from a few people. And I think people will like the series.
Okay, who has a podcast, then writes an ebook about podcasting and doesn't do an audiobook version of it? Well, not me. I've done that. In fact, I'm very excited to tell you, dear listeners, that the podcast option, my recent top-selling ebook on podcasting, my journey through 15 years as a podcaster, broadcaster, host, guest, and observer, is now an Audible audiobook. It's really, really, really exciting for me to be able to present this to you through Audible, which is available on Amazon.com, where the ebook link is as well. And in this fast listen, my experience comes to you through stories, practical tips, and advice from my hundreds of hours as a guest, producer, podcast host, and more. And the podcast option, if I say so myself, is mandatory listening for those new to podcasting, and it should be a welcome addition to veteran podcasters' library. So check out the podcast option, read by yours truly, Alex Greenwood, or as they say there, the J. Alexander Greenwood, because that's my pen name, and that's a long story, which if you dig through my podcast, eventually you'll find out what that means. But the point being today, the podcast option is available now as an Audible audiobook. I've got a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. Please do me a favor, go get that audiobook. Or if audiobooks aren't your bag, there's also a link for you to get it as an ebook. Again, the podcast option. I certainly hope you will choose it.
Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget, we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.